Ever feel like you're doing this teaching thing alone? You don't have to be. Shared teaching is all about sharing the workload through the power of collaboration and teamwork. Together, we'll walk through all the difficult parts of teaching and learn how to streamline our processes, fine-tune our time management, and develop a more manageable workload. If that sounds like a dream come true to you, then welcome to the Shared Teaching Podcast. Let's share in the teaching to make those dreams a reality. Now here's today's Shared Teaching. Hello, and welcome back to the Shared Teaching Podcast. I'm your host, Susan, the creator behind Shared Teaching, and I'm so thankful you chose this podcast episode to listen to today. We are going to be discussing advice for first-year teachers, and this is my spring edition. It's the last in my mini-series for advice for new teachers. So if you haven't heard the other episodes, you can listen to episode number 77 for the summer edition, episode number 95 for the fall edition, and episode number 108 for the winter edition. Of course, I'm going to put all those links into my podcast notes. So if you're driving, don't worry about it. You can go and click those links later. Now you've almost made it to the end of the school year. And this time of year is filled with its own set of challenges. So I'm going to give you my best advice for what to expect this time of year if you're new to teaching. And even if you're not new to teaching, maybe just this will help refresh some things that you want to think about for the end of the year. Okay, so my first thing on my episode today is going to be reflecting on the school year. So one of the things I like to do before we dismiss for the end of the year is just to take a moment and reflect on the current school year. If I wait to kind of do this reflection for the summer, the odds are that I'm going to forget some important things. While I'm still in the school year, while I'm still in my classroom, I'll sit down and make a list of things that worked well, or maybe they flopped. If you would like some more help with this concept, then go ahead and visit my blog post episode, Year-End Teaching Reflections for a Successful New Year. And of course, again, I will also link that in the show notes. At this time, I do not have a podcast episode that goes with it, but maybe I will in the future. Okay, so you're going to reflect on what happened during the school year. And if you go to that blog post, you can see a guide that's going to kind of walk you through different areas to reflect on. So I'm not going to touch on that today in this podcast episode. But one of the main things I reflect on are my lessons. So it's better when I'm on top of things to make notes throughout the school year, but sometimes we all know that our best efforts kind of fail, and this doesn't always happen. But if I take a minute to jot down notes directly on my printed lesson plans throughout the week, it's really going to help me as I go through my lesson plan book at the end of the year to remember particular things about my lessons. And these are things about like what went well, what might need more engaging, maybe kids struggled on a certain concept, and I might start seeing these trends year after year every time I give this lesson, it fails. So maybe my colleagues have a better way to approach this lesson. Or maybe every time I give this lesson, the kids don't understand. So maybe they're not getting the builded background they need from first grade. No offense to first grade teachers, but things happen like that, right? Maybe it's not in their curriculum for that standard, such as money, right? That doesn't suddenly appear until second grade. So it's no fault to some of the prior year teachers. It's just the way our standards sometimes are built. So we're going to want to reflect on our lessons. Next is activity reflections. So by activities, I mean the things that I'm doing within my day. So maybe my morning work is taking too long each day, and I really need to look for a new resource that's going to provide that same value, but provide it to me in a faster amount of time. And maybe my students need a little bit more scaffolding before we dive into our math unit on place value. I'm going to look for some ideas on how to add more spiral review with place value concepts. I also pay attention to the structure of my day. Now, some things I can't change around because maybe my admin is very specific and tells me I have to teach this subject during this block at this time, but I can think about and adjust the flow of my lessons, if that makes sense. So maybe, like I said, spiral review in the beginning, maybe there's some kind of wrap up at the end. I want to make sure I always have some kind of activity where they're practicing this. So I'm just kind of thinking about those things that I can give a little tweak so it's even better the next year. Last, you can also have student reflections. So you want to reflect together with the students to see how your year was. An easy way to do this is to create some kind of class end of the year slideshow. I, of course, have one in my TPT shop. It's always a bestseller every year. And it's templates, so all you have to do is add pictures and music, and the slideshow titles kind of help you figure out what you want to incorporate. So if you're interested in that, it will be in my show notes. Of course, you don't have to use it if you don't want to, but it's just a quick and easy way to kind of go through the year together. You can find your favorite pictures. Maybe the kids can provide pictures if they took any at like special events, and you can work on adding that. Next, we're going to talk about making a back to school plan. So now I've taught just a few years, just a few, and I have my favorite activities and tools that I use again and again. And if you're a first year teacher or even a second year teacher, you're going to find these same activities as well for yourself. But in the meantime, steal from me. The end of the year is the time that I like to start prepping these favorite activities because I know I'm going to use them again next year, right? So it's a no-brainer to just find a few times. Usually it's like the end of the school year, last few weeks, and maybe you already have your lessons planned out. This is a good time to just start prepping for the next year. Use the copier because most other teachers probably won't be using the copier. So if I consider it a non-negotiable, I put it in my copy pile. And I've talked about this before on my podcast, but I have like a little Sterilite 3-drawer system, and one of them says copy. That's what I'm talking about. It just goes in that copy drawer, and then I grab it when I have time to make copies. And that's my copy pile. Then when I have the few minutes to start running them, I'm going to do that, or I'm going to create booklets. You know, those things that you like to have folded and stapled. This is also the time of year that's great to do that. Kids are working on something, maybe they're watching a movie. I can be folding and stapling booklets for the next year. And sometimes your kids really like to help you with that. And then if you're extra lucky, sometimes you can find a parent volunteer to help as well. I was very lucky a couple years ago to have a parent that prepped a lot of my centers for me. I sent her home with my personal laminator and laminating sheets, and she went to town and brought them all back, like 300 some pages, all laminated. It was beautiful. So consider reaching out to a parent that might have some free time on their hands. Okay, some other things that I like to prep during this time of the year. There's a nice little list for you. And if you're reading this, or if you're reading this on my blog post, which you can, because I always do both at the same time. I write the blog post and I have a recorded episode. So if you're reading and listening to this at the same time, you can click on the links. If not, then the links will be in the show notes. So the first thing is my writing notebooks. So I always have plastic 3-prong I'm getting ahead of myself. Those are writing folders. I always have plastic 3-prong writing folders that I always pick the color blue. I like specific colors for each subject. And so I will go through and count which folders were destroyed this year, need to be replaced. And I will prep things like that. So, I need 5 more folders for next year because 5 of them got destroyed. Sometimes if they're built well, I can reuse the same plastic folders each year, especially if my kids took very good care of them. And maybe they just need the new plastic page protectors inside the writing folders to be replaced. So this is the time that I'm working on things like that. Maybe I'm doing some wipes of Lysol over the top of the folders to make sure they look clean for the next year. I'm also prepping writing notebooks, which are pretty much just putting a label on the cover. And then depending on the age of the student, I might cut out the notebook tabs and pre-glue them in there for them. But typically with my second graders, I have them do that because it's a pretty easy process the way I have my tabs created, that they just cut 2 little lines, fold them, and glue them in. So next, I will create the other labels I need for notebooks and folders. So while I'm making my sticky notes or not sticky notes, but my sticky labels for my writing notebooks, which are just Avery file folder labels, then I will go ahead and make the rest of them. Maybe I need one for math and science, and I always do like a word study folder. So things like that will get labels already printed, ready to go. The way I can do it is I assign my students numbers year after year. So I just quickly type the numbers, right? And then later they'll get assigned a number, and then they know that's their specific notebook and everything because it has their number on it. So I don't do student names on things. Okay, next is my parent guide booklets. These are booklets for families to explain kind of like what your child should expect during the school year. So common skills that they need to have, like different math and reading and writing skills that they should have coming in to this grade level and also mastered by the end of the grade level. It discusses a little bit about the main components of the Common Core standards because many parents, even though they've been around for a while, they're not as familiar with Common Core, especially if they have younger students and this is their first child going through the school system with Common Core. And I didn't learn this back in my day. What's this new math? Not really new math, it's just a new way to approach things. So it kind of explains that. So I have it for kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. You can see those in my TPT shop. Link is in the show notes. Next is the Sight Word Parent Guide. I like parent guides. So this is just a tiny little few page booklet that I print off. And I always do this in color because I like how the photos show up better in color. And I've taken pictures of activities or I've written out the steps for activities for parents to help their students practice sight words at home. So if you like having your students practice sight words, this might be a good thing to look into. It's just things like how to use Play-Doh to teach sight words, things that as teachers that we already know and do, but maybe parents haven't thought of. So it's just a nice little guide to give parents. I get a lot of feedback on that one every single year that parents really like it, and other teachers that use it say the same thing. So again, in my show notes, you can see what that sight word book looks like. At the time of this recording, I think it's only $2. Next is my massive sight word spelling program. I like having my students focus on sight words and practicing and reading them and spelling them throughout the school year. So I've created an entire sight word spelling program that has recorded tests. So once they've studied their sight words and they're ready for the test, they literally sit at a computer, press play, and the test is given to them. So it doesn't really take a whole lot of time out of my day to have everyone on a differentiated list. So if you're interested in seeing more about that, you might want to download the preview in my TPT shop, again, in the show notes. All right, now I'm done selling. Next is my 120 numbers charts. So literally it's just a laminated chart that has the numbers 101 through 120. So, for counting purposes and, all those math concepts, it's nice for them to have their own chart that they can pull out and look at that's a larger chart than the one that's typically shown in a tiny spot in their math book. So I like to have a laminated set of those. Each child gets one. If I'm lucky, again, I can use the same ones for the previous year, but if I'm not, maybe some are destroyed, like the expo didn't come off really well, maybe I'll just create a few more. Next is the phonics screener. My district mandates that we have to do this phonics screener for each student, especially as a second grade or first grade or kindergarten teacher. So I make sure to laminate a class set of those. I do a rough estimate on how many kids I think will be in my classroom, and then I usually add 5 because you always get new students throughout the year, especially if you are in a high transient area. So I always make sure to have a little extra because even though there might be 25 to 30 on my roster, maybe 5 of those kids move throughout the year and I get new kids in, then I want to make sure I always have some on hand for those new students that come. So that's something you always want to think of as well. To go with the 120 number charts, I like to have blank hundreds charts. And these are just paper photocopies that have 100 boxes. And I always do a little counting club, I guess you could call it, where they go all the way through the hundreds to 1200, see if they can write the numbers in order. So this is just kind of like a side activity I do when kids finish something early. They can always work on their numbers club. So these are just blank copies that they handwrite the numbers in. And then if their numbers are backwards, then they keep practicing. Maybe they get a traced copy, so they have to trace over the numbers. I also give this at the beginning of the year as a screener to see which kids can write their numbers correctly and in order coming from first grade. And then those that struggle a little bit, they get the trace the number copies. And the kids that scored well and were excellent, they move on to the next set and they practice the numbers to 200. So it's kind of a win-win. Next is maybe I'll start my back to school night slideshow. So this is just every year at the beginning of the year. You might remember if you started the school year. If you are a student teacher, you can look forward to it the next year with your new job. But it's just an introduce me slideshow. So you maybe have a slide about yourself, your expectations for the classroom, what are your class rules, what are your routines that you're going to have. If you have your schedule, you could put your schedule in there. What kind of curriculum do you use? I like to screenshot from the website the picture of like the math book or the reading book that we're using and just let parents know. Literally, it says slide with the two things going, this is our curriculum. And then just some fun little tidbits about myself or how to reach me. If I do a classroom newsletter, what to expect coming home. Please check your child's backpack for their homework each week or whatever the case may be. These are the kind of things that would go into a back to school night slideshow. So some you can always start ahead of time, especially like the about me things. If you're not sure about the curriculum yet, you can at least have a placeholder title slide. And then when back to school time comes and you know more, you can always plug those things in. But having the framework is really helpful because it just one less thing to have to do because that can be a very hectic time of the year is that back to school time. Okay, next is parent volunteer information. This is similar to the back to school night slideshow. I always like to have just like a little one-page thing about like how parents can help in the classroom with like a little checklist. They kind of check which ways they want to help, whether it's like coming in and being like a secret reader, which I have an episode coming up soon about. I'm very excited. And then there's things about like maybe they prefer to have things sent home. So I'll take a big manila envelope and I'll send some things home sometimes, like craft projects or things that need to be cut out or centers that need to be assembled. And I will send them like a little packet that goes home that says like, thanks for volunteering. And I'll give them a little sheet that talks about how they can do this thing at home. And let's see what else. Or maybe days are available to come into the building. And so this is just a handout that I'll have with back to school time when the parents come in, or I'm sending home during the first week or two of school. So I just like to have that prepped and ready to go because it's not name specific and it's just something easy that I can prep ahead of time to make the photocopies or find the little fact sheet that I'm going to use. Next is group supplies. I like to put some kids to work by sharpening pencils and putting supplies in like the little group caddies ahead of time. So I always get my current year's students to sharpen pencils for the next year's students. So I just have a bunch of, pencils that need sharpening and I just have them go to town. And I like to fill like a little pencil box up with sharpened pencils so that I just have plenty ready to go at the beginning of the school year. Because maybe I want to give each kid like 4 pencils or something. Then they're all sharpened, ready for that next class. And I have like 100 or more sharpened pencils. And I didn't put a lot of effort into it because I had a student do it, right? Even if they sharpen like 20 pencils a day, by the end of like 2 weeks, you have enough pencils. And then putting the supplies in, maybe I just have them count out like erasers and things and put them in little bundles. If I can't leave my caddies out when I pack up my classroom at the end of the year, then I put them in like Ziploc bags. So each group is in an individual Ziploc bag. And then I just put those in a cabinet somewhere. And I know when it's back to school time, I can just pull them out, dump them where they need to go. It's good. It's ready to go. One less thing off my plate for the back to school year. Then I also think about first week of school activities. If there's any specific activities like making friends, trying to think what else I usually do. I like to do like an SEL, like social emotional, like little lap book that's really cute about like calm down breathing techniques and things like that. And that's the kind of stuff we do like in the first week of school as we're getting to know each other. So maybe I'm doing, it's a little early for it, but sometimes if I have my class list, I will start typing up the names, and I just find like a font that does like, I call them bubble fonts, where you can color in the letters, and I'll type up each kid's name about 3 to a page. And then when the class list is ready and it's like the day before school starts, I'll print it out and I'll cut them apart, and then I'll put them on cardstock, and then the kids decorate them, and then that's their name tag for a few weeks of school, because we'll have rotations of kids that either don't show up, or you get new kids in, or they get transferred to another classroom for some reason. So I don't like to do permanent name tags until my classes had kind of settled a little bit. Might be different for your school. Again, I'm usually in a transient area, so kids are fluctuating a lot. So I just like to do the paper ones, and then as I know better about my list, I'll start doing a laminated name tag for them. And then last but not least, maybe I like to do a back to school postcard or a letter for my incoming students. This is a great time to prep that as well. You can just leave the top with their name off, but maybe just handwrite the notes about like, oh, I'm so excited that you'll be in my class next year. I look forward to seeing you on. And then you put the first day of school, love your new teacher, sign your name, and then you can just mail those postcards, like a couple weeks before school starts. But at least you have them stacked, ready to go. They're all ready to be personalized once you get your roster. The next section we're going to talk about is staying consistent. So the end of the year is not the time to let your routines lapse. None of the times of the year are, actually. You always want to be staying consistent throughout the school year so your students know exactly what to expect. They're very clear with your expectations. There's no confusion. This is a lot easier said than done, believe me, I know, especially if you're moving classrooms, you're changing grade levels, or maybe you're moving to another school year the next year. We all want a head start packing up and thinking about the upcoming year, but the more we can keep some of our routines and expectations in place, the less behaviors we're going to see. A great way to keep students working while you sneak in some reflection or packing is to have them create a memory book. There's quite a few really great ones available on TPT, and they're bound to give you just a couple of hours of freedom when they're coloring and reflecting away. This is where I'm saying you can work on putting together your photocopies, like you've already photocopied a stack. Now maybe you're collating books or stapling packets. This is when you find the time to do it because your kids are coloring and doing a memory book with their friends. Okay, again, with keeping high expectations, you don't want to forget that you need to keep the high expectations for their behaviors as well. This is the time of year where students are going to work to push those boundaries and get off task during the last couple of months before summer. Much like any break, you're going to want to incorporate a different classroom management strategy to keep them focused and excited about doing well. I love a good, easy themed classroom incentive for these times of the year. So you're going to think maybe a classroom ice cream party, a dance party, some free time, extra recess. Maybe take a poll and see what your class likes best, because when they choose the reward, it becomes more meaningful for them when they earn it, and they're more excited to try to earn it. Okay, you also want to, last but not least, expect the unexpected. If this is your first year teaching, the end of the year can be full of unexpected items that you're expected to complete, and not only complete, but complete ASAP. So even as a seasoned teacher, things will pop up that are new for the school year. This is pretty typical for our job, so we always really have to be flexible. I know a lot of us sometimes hate hearing that word, but it's really true. Teaching is not for the inflexible. So the few of the things that I've seen that are pretty expected, but maybe unexpected to a new teacher, are sorting students, classroom closeout lists, and final report card preparations. So let's talk a little bit about some of those. So for sorting students, at the end of each school year, each teacher is often given some kind of way of identifying students that get sorted into their next classroom. Many times you're going to get like little slips of paper where you write the student's name, maybe their math and reading levels, if they have IEPs, what kind of behavior student are they, high, medium, or low, and just kind of a general assessment of their level. And the best way to prepare for this is to ask a member of your team that's been there before what type of information you usually put on these cards, or if there's some kind of system your school already has for sorting classes. Then you can kind of gather like test information or whatever else you're going to need to complete them ahead of time so that when you do get handed them, you're prepared, ready to fill them out. Okay, let's talk about classroom closeout lists. Many schools require the teachers to pack up at the end of the year. Some schools are different in their expectations depending on what they plan to do with the classroom over the summer. So if they're going to be painting the walls, maybe they don't want anything on the walls. So it's really very variable for each school and what is going to happen during the summer. I've been at schools that require everything to be packed up and put away off of all surfaces, so nothing on top of shelves, nothing on countertops, nothing on the floors. And I've even had other schools where they allow me to keep my bulletin board with the paper and everything up, but maybe not like the child's artwork. But it really, like I said, it varies a lot. So again, you're going to want to check with a colleague to see what your usual expectations at that school are. And don't be surprised if whatever your colleague tells you changes later. Almost every school, though, has given me some sort of checklist that needs to be followed before you're officially off duty and on summer break. This checklist usually has things that you've put away, your supplies, you've packed up your personal belongings, you've turned in any necessary devices, maybe like the teacher computer, remotes. Sometimes those have to be turned into the technology person. And maybe each time you go around to turn something in, like the librarian has to sign off, the technology person has to sign off, your admin has to sign off, like they've checked your room. All these things need to be in place and all these signatures need to be collected before you're allowed to leave. Okay, other things might be picking up or maybe turning in curriculum. Like if you're getting new curriculum, maybe you have to go grab the boxes from wherever they have them. You have to file the report cards in the cumulative folders. If you're not digitalized yet, digitized, and you want to turn in your classroom keys. And let's talk very briefly about report cards. So final report cards usually mean, of course, creating them. So inputting the grades, making the comments, checking them, and maybe sometimes your admin has to sign off on them. And then sometimes there's like a stamp or something where you stamp that your principal, quote unquote, signed it with the rubber stamp, and then you have to file those away. So just some things to think about as you're heading into the wrap up of your school year. Congratulations on making it to the end. And if you missed any of the previous posts about my first year teacher advice series, don't forget in the show notes, you can click on any of those links as well as any of the resources I mentioned today. And if you have any advice that I forgot, if you are not a New Year teacher and you're fairly well seasoned and I forgot some advice, please don't be afraid to leave it in any of the comments. So if you do a review on Apple Podcast, you can always say episode 118, put some comments there about extra advice that I might have forgotten about, or if you go to my blog post, sharedteaching.com, you can leave it as a comment on my blog post. Thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned for next time. See you then. Bye for now. If you've loved this show, then join me in sharing the teaching,
hitting that subscribe button,
and leaving us a review on
iTunes,
so we can be found by more teachers like you who are ready to start sharing the workload. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Find new episodes each week on sharedteaching.com. Thanks for listening to the Shared Teaching Podcast.